Travel brought visitors. Education increased. Schools sprang up everywhere. Freedom of culture began to be enjoyed. In some cases, comparatively moderate, but at the same time far in excess of that which previously existed. Then all of a sudden, with two great world wars, this progress was stopped in its tracks. Things began to go back to the medieval, to the incredibly limited and restricted. And the natural tendency of all these peoples was to fall back upon tradition, upon the traditional struggle of their great and venerated heroes to achieve these ends which men knew were right. Thus, societies that had either been extinct for several hundred years were brought back to life, or those which had changed their purposes to more benevolent or fraternal ends were rededicated to their original projects. And out of the general situation has risen a network of secret societies. These, many of them, with strong political purposes, because there seems to be no other way of breaking through the tyranny that now oppresses them. Most of these societies are created out of groups of so-called ordinary citizens. Sometimes from such a group will arise, as has occurred in the past, a brilliant leader. But because these societies are built from the people and not from the so-called oligarchy or leading group, these societies are for the most part not only patriotic but religious. They represent, again, the demand for spiritual consolation and strength, and the right to preserve and protect worship, and to bring their children into direct contact with valuable ideals. These parents have observed the detrimental effect of the prevailing policies upon the young, how their children are losing the ideals and principles which are the basis of good citizenship in a free world. They therefore desire to restore this right of citizenship and to privately instruct their children against the common pressure of public instruction. Thus, in almost every bracket of life, the public way is antagonistic to the private conviction of the citizen. He meets this by strengthening his own position, and in union there is strength. Therefore he unites with others of his kind in a protective alliance, re-establishing the ancient ceremonies of initiation in order to protect himself against the possibility of treason. It is impossible to say at the present time how many persons are actually involved in such societies. We see the different types appearing in a fleeting manner in our own country, and there is scarcely a male that comes into the office which doesn't have some kind of advertising or publicity, even here, relating to organizations rising up or continuing for various purposes, either benevolent or not benevolent. Sometimes the society is a distinctly unpleasant entity, one which is created simply to preserve bigotry or to protect tyranny of some kind. On the whole, however, particularly where the need is great, the society is benevolent. It is only in a secure civilization that societies can afford to bicker and can afford to establish unhealthy programs. In your oppressed areas, there is neither inclination nor time for such extravagances. Out of all of this thinking, then comes the archetypal fact, resting in ourselves, of the importance of the individual maintaining certain individuality, even where a civilization is comparatively adequate. I think that the great struggle of the secret society today follows the secret impulse of man himself, and that is the impulse to be oneself against what appears to be a majority pressure. Today, the person struggling to keep his values finds that for many reasons these values are continually being undermined. Here in the West, the preservation of value is possible, inasmuch as we have freedom of assembly and freedom of worship. But some way, as in other times, we are not convinced that all of the advantages that we have are best suited to our needs, or that we are making the best possible use of our various advantages. There are many devout persons who are not entirely satisfied with the theological opportunities offered by community worship. There are many deep and profound scholars who are not satisfied with the present pattern of our educational system. These and other dissatisfactions lead persons to various endeavors. They lead educators of a liberal mind to create new schools in order to bring this education to the people. They invite the formation of new religious groups to emphasize what is regarded as neglected spirituality. There is also the continuance of your political and your labor organization for various purposes, some of which are due and proper, some of which are oppressive and excessive. But these things arising in a free assembly ultimately solve themselves. But in other areas they will not solve themselves, because such opportunities are not given. Each person finds in the course of his years the tremendous pressures which are against his ability to do those things which he regards as essentially right and proper. For instance, today we have a great many persons who strongly resent, as individuals, the business practices imposed upon them in the course of their employment. They are expected to do things and to make compromises with their own principles, which they resent. And as a result of collective wrong policies, the individual is under heavy psychological pressure and tension. There is therefore in this alone a simple answer to a need. The individuals so unhappy, so resentful, will probably ultimately organize. They will force their opinion upon the world by uniting among themselves. And this is your essential pattern for the rise of societies. In a free society of men, these societies wave their flags, have public assembly, and receive broad publicity. In a tyrannical situation, such societies must go underground, must hide themselves, and seek to gather numerical or political strength in order that they may ultimately overwhelm the tyranny that opposes them. This concept does remain as an important consideration. There is one other point which I think we should also bear in mind as we analyze societies of this nature, namely the belief that was held and is held in many parts of the world that behind and beyond all of this confusion that we know, there is an archetypal social pattern. And a good example of this would be found by the contemplation of Eastern and Near Eastern religious philosophy. Among both your Far Asiatics and your Near Asiatics, there is the common belief that above and beyond the ordinary governments, the ordinary leaderships, and the more traditional secret societies, there are in the world certain groups that have functioned and existed in complete secrecy over vast periods of time. That these secret societies have not ceased, but continue to exercise a powerful directive upon humanity. This, in turn, strikes a deep and responsive root in the psychological life of the individual. It is only another way by which he says there is a purpose. There is a plan. There is a broad wall of protection around the activities of mortals, whereby they cannot destroy themselves or injure themselves beyond the possibility of reasonable remedy. Psychologically, this concept has always existed. Factually, it is to be found in many places. It is not easy for us to accept such an idea, perhaps, but if you are on the caravan trail out of Samarkand or some place of that nature, and you sit down with the native peoples, with the men of the desert, who live in their own strange, distant region, facing the immediate problems of life as we do not have to face them anymore. And you hear what they say, and you think with them. You suddenly perceive, as it were, a world of overtones, real to these people. And after you have discussed with them, these overtones become strangely real to you, because you have been moved out of the simple security of your own way of life into another pattern. I think we may safely say that half of the people of the earth today believe that between God as a supreme principle and man as the projection of that principle into society, that between these there are intermediaries, that there are always in the world certain God-enlightened prophets, certain great teachers, wise ones, as mentioned in the scriptures of every people, including the Christian scriptures, that this world is not suspended in a void, that we are not left without certain resources, and that if we wish to regard these resources as arising from an archetypal government within ourselves, then psychologically there is at the root of us a tremendous archetypal fraternity, a fraternity of purposes by which individuals are bound together at their sources, even though they are widely diversified and divided in their developments and in the periphery of their existences. The existence of this over-kind of government is man's way of symbolically stating that he believes in law, that he believes in order, that all the divine principles operating in nature are substantially invisible in themselves and visible only in their consequences. Yet these invisible principles are continuously conspiring, and conspiring with evidence of rational directive toward the improvement of man and the protection of those values which man has come to regard as indispensable. It is only a step, therefore, to consider a kind of hierarchy, a kind of overgroup, bound together by true knowledge, bound together by a common possession of realities, that this group form some kind of a formal or informal